What's the strangest conversation you've accidentally eavesdropped on? At a Chinese restaurant. An old man says to his friend, "I'm telling you my balls swelled up like this." Then he holds his hands apart like ass holding a grapefruit. That shit legit happens. It's insane. You ever seen a bowling ball stuffed into way too tiny, scrunched up, purple leather bowling ball bag that was rolled around in sweat and dog fur? It's worse than that. I overheard two guys on the subway in NYC discussing what was the perfect handgun caliber to whack someone. There was a small dude who was adamant that the best gun was a 9mm because that's what cops use. Then the big dude starts shaking his head negatively, goes on to give a small speech about anatomy ballistics, then proceeds to state that a competent assassin would use a mere .22 handgun, since it's hard to track, ammo is cheap and you can mag dump someone in the head without anyone knowing it's gunfire. I think those guys were on their way to the Hitman convention. A few kids were debating on what happened to the poop after you flushed it on the train. One believed it exploded on impact with the rails, another debated the possibility of it being shot out of the side like a cannon, and another knew it was used to fuel the train. I was in line for a roller coaster years ago when I overheard a 12-year-old and her even younger sister talking to two nice strangers, all standing in line behind me. The 12-year-old was talking about how she lives on a farm with her grandparents, her little sister and her newborn kid. She goes on and on about her young kid, and how her grandparents homeschool her so she has time to raise and take care of her kid and how her little sister is helping too. She goes on to describe how little and precious and sweet her kid is and how much she loves her. I spent the entire time in line stunned and speechless and impressed by how engaged and unbothered the two strangers were during the whole conversation, asking to see pictures etc. It wasn't until we got to the front of the line that I realized she meant kid. As in a baby goat. My neighbor's talking to a prostitute about paying the price of 1 hour, but she wanted double the pay cause there were two guys with her. She wanted 1 hour per person, and the guys wanted to pay 1 hour period. I once sat on my balcony 3rd floor at 2 a.m. to listen to a guy ground level who discovered his girlfriend was cheating on him 4th floor. He climbed a tree and saw her topless with the guy with her light on. I opened a beer and took a seat. "You said you were studying. You don't study with your shirt off." Was checking into a luxury hotel when I was younger, and the people in the next room were fucking like animals. So I keyed a bit slower than I normally would have because I had never been in this situation and I was intrigued, and then in between grunts and moans she yells, "I bet your wife doesn't fuck you like this." Probably goes on every day, but I never heard something like that before or since. One hella weird affair. She is almost flexing that she is freaking him instead of his wife. Me and some co-workers were eating lunch outside on a patio and all of a sudden two guys walked by and one goes, "I was licking her butthole and forget I was allergic to peanuts so I spent the night in a hospital." We started cracking up and the guy noticed and said, "What?" It happens. How do you explain that one in the emergency room? There's this girl I know and I had forgotten how much she likes Reese's peanut butter cups. I swear, she eats one with every meal. So, I take her to my place and the wine starts flowing. Once listened to a story a woman was telling her friend sitting next to me in a cafe. She became suspicious of her husband cheating on her when she was helping him unpack from a business trip and noticed a weird white stain on his shirt. She told the whole story of her Googling how to figure out what it was, which I think included using specific light and stuff. Never actually got to hear the ending though, unfortunately. My downstairs neighbors were having a fight. I was listening to a woman yelling, "Did you fuck her? Did you fuck her?" over and over. It really got exciting when another woman answered, "No. No, I didn't." Heard over a cue ball at work you promised that we would get a divorce after you got your green card. I was once in a Starbucks in Boston and witnessed a breakup which was immediately followed a failed proposal attempt. It was the craziest thing. The dude was very into her and her body language did not reply in a copacetic manner. He confessed his love to her, she replied that it wasn't gonna work and she might need some time. He replied, "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out, so you have time though." He got down on a knee, pulled out a ring, she stood up and said, "This is what I am talking about." "You don't listen," she asked him to stand up. He said with tears in his eyes, "Why?" "I am still waiting for an answer." She gathered her things, took left out the back. The man sat back down and finished his frappuccino while crying. I refer to the story as the saddest cold coffee beverage ever. Killing time in Starbucks before my bus comes when two well-dressed businessmen walk in. "Hey, crazy day yesterday, huh? Ha, yeah. I didn't know you could train dogs to do that." It haunts me. I have so many questions that will never be answered. A boy was telling his sister if she remembers how their mom used to beat them when they were kids. They were no older than 9. It was obviously weird because that's not the kind of thing you would talk about with a couple dozen people around them. Abuse can warp what is normal for someone. For them that might have been a regular conversation, same as asking if they remember the last time they ate a nice restaurant. Just last week, I was in line for customer service at the grocery store with my girlfriend. Sketchy-looking dude comes up to the woman in line behind us, says hi, and she says something to the effect of, "I don't think I should be talking to you right now, I don't even know where my daughter is." They started talking quieter and we couldn't make out all of what they were saying, but we at one point heard her say something along the lines of, "Why can't you just admit that she might be in Iowa?" Unfortunately our turn to get helped came up, and we had to abandon the conversation. Wish we would have been able to hear more. Well, sort of the opposite, but when I was in high school, we would run laps around the perimeter drive of our football field for PE, and part of this drive was right up next to a bunch of classrooms. A lot of times, teachers would have the windows open. My high school is an old Frankenstein of additions from the last 120 years, so we still have windows that open and close, so my friends and I made it a point to have the absolute weirdest conversations we could right next to any of these open windows in an effort to distract and confuse anyone who happened to be listening from inside. I think my favorite starter anecdote was, and I shamelessly stole this from Whose Line, and that's how my colon ended up in my esophagus. I was later told by one of the teachers who recognized me that their whole class stopped and confusedly looked at each other before laughing it off. It was one of my proudest moments. Gangster type sitting behind me on the bus, on his phone, rationalizing murdering his ex-girlfriend and anybody who got in the way to a friend of his trying to talk him out of it. The gangster was telling his friend that this was something that Jesus would do. The next few days I kept an eye on local news and thankfully no reports of anybody being murdered. I was on the train listening to a woman yell on the phone that she wouldn't be able to make it to her dentist appointment because she had left her teeth at home. Dude walking down Collins Ave by South Beach in Miami on his cell phone. Said, "But baby, you know I gots to slap you if you piss me off." She had left him and he was calling her to plead for her to come back to him. He sounded genuinely upset. 2 French strippers talking about one of them having period blood running down her leg while on stage. It was a dress shop and I was sitting in the husband chair while my wife tried on dresses. They were sharing a room and would come out to the 3-way mirror and speak in French while they posed/modeled their dresses. When my wife finally came out and it was time to leave, I looked at them both and said au revoir. 2 of them. Conversation 1: coming home on Amtrak from visiting my family a few years ago. A young 20-something couple sits behind me, and they clearly have just gotten engaged. They're happy, they're talking to each other in just the most loving, affectionate way, and discussing plans for their upcoming wedding. It's all good. This is clearly a happy and excited couple, and you could tell this was probably the first discussion they'd had about their wedding plans. So the girl happily brings up something about what they should have on the menu, like 2 or 3 choices for the adults, but then a 4th option that the kids would like. And the guy goes, "Kids? I don't want kids there." Instantly, the temperature in the train car drops about 10 degrees. She goes, "You don't? How can we not let kids there? We have family members with kids. Kids have to be allowed." Then he says, and this is a point I thought was very valid, he says, having kids at the wedding or having a child-free wedding makes it a very different kind of ceremony. It's not just a matter of kids are allowed/kids aren't allowed. It changes the tone of the whole thing, which, actually I agree with. I'm not married, but I've been to plenty of weddings that were kid-free and some that were kids allowed, and they were both very different. The train ride was 3.5 hours, and the conversation just got worse and worse the whole way. Again, to give the prospective groom credit, he stayed very calm and tried to be rational about it. She went from glowingly happy to less happy, to attempted neutrality to furious. By the time we got to our destination, she was crying and yelling at him. He made points that if we don't have kids at our wedding, it doesn't mean we don't like kids, or don't love our family members who have kids. It just means that if we want a more adult, intimate wedding, it's something we need to strongly consider. I wondered about them later on, if that was something that was clearly a deal breaker for both of them. Conversation 2. This one is shorter again. A few years ago, I was at a small neighborhood drugstore. I was at the register paying for my stuff, and behind me was a girl with two guys, and they're buying two huge boxes of condoms. I'm facing the cashier when all of a sudden I hear the girl say, "We're gonna have a good time. You both are gonna get so lucky tonight, I'm gonna give you guys everything you want." I looked across and locked eyes with the cashier. We both communicated a silent "holy shit" to each other as she handed me my items and I hurried out.